A single splash of water ignited a revolution, exposing a truth that could no longer be ignored. In the heart of Carson City's Willow Creek precinct, a disguised chief faced a shocking act of contempt cold water poured over her head by an officer blind to her true power. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a battle for dignity, accountability, and the soul of a community. Will justice prevail, and can a broken system be rebuilt? Stay with us to witness a leader's courage and a reckoning that changes everything. Like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to catch every gripping moment of this unforgettable journey. In a single, vicious moment, a bottle of water became a weapon of contempt, dousing a woman's dignity in the heart of a police station. The cold liquid splashed over her faded baseball cap, soaking her braided hair and streaming down her face, leaving her navy t-shirt clinging to her skin. Dark patches spread across the cracked linoleum floor of the Willow Creek precinct in Carson City, Nevada, each drip echoing in the stunned silence. The air hung heavy with the bitter scent of burnt coffee, cheap disinfectant, and the faint must of neglect. She stood there, rigid, water pooling around her scuffed sneakers, her body taut with shock. No scream, no outburst, just a sharp, stifled gasp, a blend of disbelief and barely contained fury. Her stillness was louder than any protest could have been. The room seemed to hold its breath, every eye fixed on her, waiting for what came next. Officer Daniel Holt, a burly man in his late 40s, stood behind the worn oak counter, his face flushed with a cruel satisfaction. His narrow eyes gleamed as he gripped the empty plastic bottle, his voice thundering through the lobby. "Get out of here. This is a police station, not a playground for your kind to stir up trouble." The words landed like a slap, raw and unfiltered, exposing a venom that chilled the onlookers. A few civilians slumped in plastic chairs, their faces frozen in shock, hands clutching purses or phones, too stunned to speak. A young officer in the corner, papers half sorted, glanced up, his cheeks paling but his feet stayed glued to the floor, paralyzed by the scene unfolding. The woman didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her head, water glistening on her dark skin, tracing paths down her cheeks. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, cut through the haze of Holt's contempt. They weren't the eyes of a victim, they were piercing, calculating, alive with a quiet fire. "You're kind," she repeated, her voice low but steady, each syllable slicing the tension like a blade. "What exactly do you mean by that, officer?" Her question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in calm, daring him to dig deeper into his own prejudice. The lobby, already silent, seemed to tighten, every drip of water amplifying the weight of her words. This wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a spark, igniting a confrontation that would unravel everything. What had led to this moment? Who was this woman? Standing soaked but unbroken, and why was she here? The answer was coming, and it would shake the very foundation of Willow Creek Precinct. No one in that stunned lobby could have guessed the truth behind the woman standing drenched and defiant. The water still dripped from her soaked cap, each drop a quiet testament to the indignity she'd endured, but her piercing gaze held a secret that would soon unravel everything. She was no ordinary citizen caught in a cruel officer's crosshairs. She was Dr. Angela Carter, 38, the newly sworn chief of police for Carson City, Nevada. A black woman with a doctorate in criminal justice, Carter had built a formidable reputation in Baltimore, where she'd transformed a police department plagued by distrust and scandal. Now, Carson City, a vibrant but fractured hub of diversity, had called on her to heal its own wounds. The city simmered with tension, divided by economic gaps and shaken by police misconduct. Allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and dismissive service had eroded public faith. The city council saw Carter as their beacon of hope, a leader who could rebuild trust from the ground up. But Carter knew trust wasn't won with speeches or polished reports. The heart of a department's problems pulsed in its daily interactions, fleeting moments at a precinct counter where citizens met the system face to face. To uncover the truth, she had to see it for herself, unfiltered. That morning, she'd stood before her closet, bypassing her crisp uniform and tailored suits. Instead, she chose faded jeans, worn at the knees, a plain navy t-shirt, and a tattered baseball cap from a long-ago vacation. She pulled her braided hair into a tight bun, tucking it beneath the cap's brim, and skipped makeup to look like any overworked, ordinary woman. As Lila Brooks, she would be unremarkable, invisible to those who judged by appearance, a perfect test of her officer's character. Her destination was Willow Creek Precinct, a hotspot of citizen complaints, where one name kept surfacing in personnel files. Officer Daniel Holt, badge number 317. Holt's record was a patchwork of grievances, rudeness, impatience, whispers of bias often dismissed as misunderstandings or swept under the rug. Carter sensed he was a symptom of a deeper rot, and she needed to see it firsthand. Parking her borrowed, nondescript sedan a few blocks away, she blended into the morning bustle of Carson City streets, her heart steady but her mind racing. This wasn't just a visit, it was a mission to expose the truth and set the stage for change. As she pushed through the precinct's heavy glass doors, the weight of her purpose settled over her. What she found inside would test her resolve and spark a reckoning no one saw coming. As Dr. Angela Carter stepped into the dim, peeling lobby of Willow Creek Precinct, the weight of her mission pressed harder, but no one could have predicted the storm about to erupt. Disguised as Lila Brooks, a working-class woman in faded jeans and a worn cap, she approached the towering oak counter with a calculated calm, her heart steady but her senses sharp. Behind the bulletproof glass sat Officer Daniel Holt, badge number 317, his eyes glued to his phone, thumbs scrolling with a scowl etched deep into his face. The precinct hummed with a restless, quiet civilians fidgeting in plastic chairs, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights casting a sickly yellow glow. Carter had prepared her story meticulously. Lila Brooks, a tenant in a nearby apartment complex, needed guidance on filing a restraining order against a neighbor whose late-night noise and recent threats had crossed a line. It was a routine issue, serious but not urgent, the kind of request that tested an officer's patience and professionalism. She stood at the counter, waiting. 1 minute passed, then 2. Holt didn't look up, his sighs of irritation punctuating the silence. She coughed softly, a polite nudge. Nothing. Finally she spoke, her voice gentle but clear. "Excuse me, officer. I need some help with a restraining order." Holt's head snapped up, his small eyes narrowing as they swept over her cap, t-shirt, sneakers with a disdain that felt like a physical shove. "What do you want?" he barked, his tone sharp enough to cut. Carter, as Lila, explained her situation, her words measured, asking about the process for reporting harassment. Holt's response was a long, theatrical sigh, his phone slamming onto the counter with a thud that startled a nearby civilian. "Restraining order? That's courthouse stuff, not here. Figure it out." His dismissal was cold, final, as if her presence was an inconvenience he couldn't be bothered to tolerate. Carter pressed on, her voice still polite but firmer. "I understand the petition goes to court, but I read that a police report is needed first. I'd like to report my neighbor's threats." Holt's face twisted, a sneer curling his lips. "Threats? What? Some loud music or a yappy dog? This isn't your personal complaint desk, lady. We deal with real crimes, robberies, break-ins. Take your little drama somewhere else." His words dripped with contempt, the phrase, "your little drama," laced with a venom that hinted at something uglier, something personal. The civilians in the lobby shifted uncomfortably, their whispers barely audible. But Carter felt the air thicken with tension. She took a slow breath, her pulse quickening, yet her face remained composed. This was the test. How far would Holt's bias and unprofessionalism go? "Officer," she said, her tone now edged with quiet authority, "I'm a citizen asking for help. That's your job. I need your name and badge number." The request was a spark in a powder keg. Holt's eyes flashed, his massive frame leaning forward, the counter creaking under his weight. "My name? So you can run off and whine to someone? I know your type, always stirring up trouble." His voice rose, booming through the lobby, drawing every eye. The young officer in the corner froze, papers clutched tightly, his face a mask of unease. Carter stood her ground, her gaze locked on Holt's, unflinching. The Mothworn was no longer just about a restraining order, it was about respect, dignity, and the unspoken biases that fueled his rage. The lobby held its breath, sensing the collision course they were on, unaware that this confrontation was only the beginning of a reckoning. But the storm brewing at the Willow Creek Precinct counter was far from over. It was about to explode. Dr. Angela Carter, disguised as Lila Brooks, stood firm, her calm request for Officer Daniel Holt's name and badge number hanging in the air like a lit fuse. Holt's face contorted, his eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to boil from deep within, fueled by her quiet defiance. The lobby, already taut with tension, felt like it might snap. Civilians clutched their belongings, their whispers fading into a heavy silence, while the young officer in the corner stood paralyzed, his papers forgotten. Holt's massive frame loomed behind the counter, his fist slamming down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "You think you can push me?" he roared, his voice thick with menace, veins bulging at his temples. "I've had enough of people like you, always demanding, always trouble." The words, "people like you," landed with a sickening weight, their venom unmistakable, a raw edge of prejudice slicing through the room. Carter's pulse quickened, but her face remained a mask of composure, her eyes locked on his, unyielding. She knew this moment was the crux of her mission to see how far Holt's bias would take him when challenged by someone he deemed beneath him. The air grew stifling, the scent of burnt coffee and disinfectant sharpening the scene's grim reality. Then, in a flash of reckless rage, Holt spotted a half-full water bottle on his desk. His hand shot out, seizing it like a weapon. "You want to play tough?" he snarled, his voice cracking with anger. To the horror of everyone watching, he unlocked the counter side door and stormed into the lobby, his heavy boots thudding on the cracked linoleum. Carter stood her ground, her heart racing but her stance unwavering, as Holt marched toward her, his face a twisted mask of fury. Without a word, he ripped the cap off the bottle and tipped it over her head. Cold water cascaded down, soaking her cap, her braids, her t-shirt, streaming onto the floor in dark, spreading pools. Gasps erupted from the onlookers, sharp and jagged, as the lobby froze in disbelief. A woman in the chairs covered her mouth, eyes wide. An older man shook his head, muttering under his breath. The young officer flinched, his face ashen. But he didn't move. The water dripped from Carter's chin, each drop a silent accusation. Yet she didn't flinch or recoil. Her silence was deafening, a stark contrast to Holt's heaving breaths and the empty bottle still clutched in his trembling hand. His eyes flickered with a fleeting triumph. But beneath it, a shadow of unease crept in, as if he sensed he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The room pulsed with outrage, the injustice of the act searing into every witness. What would happen next? Would this brazen abuse of power go unanswered, or was something bigger about to unfold? Hit that like button if this moment fired you up. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And subscribe to catch the explosive twist coming in the next part. You won't believe what happens when the truth comes out. In that frozen moment, as water dripped from Dr. Angela Carter's soaked cap and pooled on the Willow Creek Precinct's cracked linoleum, no one could have anticipated the seismic shift about to rock the lobby. Officer Daniel Holt stood before her, chest heaving, the empty water bottle still gripped in his trembling hand, his face a volatile mix of triumph and creeping unease. The civilians in their plastic chairs sat rigid, their gasps lingering in the air, while the young officer in the corner remained rooted, his eyes wide with dread. The stench of burnt coffee and disinfectant clung to the scene, sharpening the raw injustice of Holt's act. But Carter, disguised as Lila Brooks, was no ordinary victim. Her silence, heavy and deliberate, pulsed with a power yet to be unleashed. Slowly, she reached up, her fingers brushing the wet strands of her braids, and grasped the brim of her sodden cap. With a measured grace, she removed it, letting her hair fall free, her face now fully exposed. Her sharp, angular features and piercing eyes radiated an unmistakable authority, stripping away the guise of the unremarkable woman Holt had scorned. The lobby seemed to hold its breath as she fixed her gaze on him, unyielding, her presence commanding the room. "Officer Daniel Holt, badge number 317, she began, her voice deep and resonant, cutting through the silence like a gavel. "Refusing service, hurling insults, and now assaulting a citizen with a bottle of water. Is this the standard of Carson City Police? Holt's eyes widened, confusion flickering as her words landed. She continued, her tone icy with resolve. I am Dr. Angela Carter, Chief of Police, sworn in 10 days ago. I'm here, undercover, to see how my officers treat the people we're sworn to serve. And you, Officer Holt, have just shown me a disgrace. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Holt's face drained of color, his mouth gaping as he staggered back, the bottle slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. Chief? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper, cracking with panic. No, I didn't know. Chief, I'm sorry, I swear. His bravado crumbled, replaced by raw fear as he stumbled forward, nearly collapsing at her feet. Please, I've got kids, Bills. It was a mistake, a bad moment. Don't end my career. His voice choked with desperation, tears welling in his eyes, his massive frame shrinking into something pitiful. The onlookers stared, a mix of shock and satisfaction rippling through them, their earlier outrage now tinged with awe at Carter's strength. She stood tall, water still glistening on her skin, her expression unyielding, not cruel, but resolute, a beacon of justice in a soaked t-shirt. A mistake? She repeated, her voice steady, each word weighted with disappointment. This wasn't a mistake, officer. This was a choice. Turning to the young officer in the corner, she commanded, Get Lieutenant Hayes here, now. Tell him the chief is in the lobby. The officer snapped to attention, scrambling toward the back. Carter's gaze returned to Holt, her silence louder than his pleas, promising consequences that would echo far beyond this moment. The lobby buzzed with a new energy. Justice was stirring, and the reckoning had just begun. As the echo of Dr. Angela Carter's commanding voice still lingered in the Willow Creek Precinct lobby, the air crackled with the promise of accountability. Officer Daniel Holt, his face ashen and his pleas dissolving into a trembling silence, stood exposed, his act of cruelty laid bare before a room of stunned onlookers. Water still dripped from Carter's soaked t-shirt, each drop a reminder of the indignity she'd endured. Yet her unwavering presence signaled that this was no longer just a confrontation. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The civilians in their plastic chairs leaned forward, their shock giving way to a flicker of hope, while the young officer's hurried footsteps faded toward the back, summoning Lieutenant Hayes. Carter's revelation as chief of police had shifted the room's gravity, and now, the wheels of justice were about to turn. Within minutes, Lieutenant Hayes, a grizzled veteran with a neatly pressed uniform, burst into the lobby, his eyes widening at the sight of Carter, drenched but resolute, and Holt, a broken figure clutching the edge of the counter. Chief? He stammered, his voice thick with confusion. Carter's gaze was steel. Lieutenant Hayes, Officer Holt, badge number 317, is suspended effective immediately. Secure his badge, weapon, and radio. Ensure he's isolated until internal affairs arrives. Understood? Hayes nodded, his shock morphing into grim determination as he motioned for the young officer to assist. Holt, his shoulders sagging, was led away, his mumbled apologies swallowed by the heavy silence. The onlookers exchanged glances, a quiet satisfaction settling over them. Justice, at last, was in motion. The Internal Affairs Unit descended on Willow Creek Precinct within the hour. Their investigation launched with a precision that matched Carter's resolve. Security footage, crystal clear and unforgiving, captured every damning moment. Holt's dismissive sneers, his venomous insults, in the chilling instant he poured water over Carter's head. Carter's testimony, delivered with measured clarity, recounted the encounter from her arrival as Lila Brooks to the final, humiliating act. Statements from the civilians, 3 who stayed, their voices steady despite initial fear, corroborated her account, painting a vivid picture of Holt's unprovoked hostility. The young officer, though hesitant, added his own observations, his words tinged with shame for not intervening. Holt's personnel file, pried open under scrutiny, revealed a troubling pattern. 5 years of complaints about rudeness, impatience, and biased remarks, mostly toward women and minorities, often dismissed with verbal warnings or no action at all. The evidence was ironclad, a stark indictment of not just Holt, but a system that had let such behavior fester. The disciplinary board, convened under Carter's direct oversight, faced a pivotal moment. Firing Holt was the obvious choice as actions justified it, but Carter pushed for something bolder, a response that punished yet offered a path to change. After intense deliberation, they delivered a groundbreaking ruling. Holt would face a 1-year unpaid suspension, a financial blow that would sting deeply, coupled with mandatory enrollment in the Path to Change program. This 2-year initiative was no slap on the wrist. It demanded intensive training in anger management, anti-bias education, and civil rights law, weekly therapy sessions to confront his prejudices, and 200 hours of supervised community service in Carson City's diverse neighborhoods. Every 3 months, an independent panel would assess his progress, and any failure to show genuine transformation would mean permanent dismissal. No appeal. The civilians who'd witnessed the incident left the precinct that day with a renewed flicker of faith, whispering about a chief who didn't just talk about reform but acted on it. The lobby, once a stage for humiliation, now buzzed with the promise of a system being reshaped. Carter stood alone for a moment, her wet clothes a badge of her sacrifice, her heart buoyed by the first step toward change. But the road ahead was long, and Holt's fate, whether he could confront his demons or be consumed by them, remained unwritten. The hope that justice could rebuild trust was alive, but it demanded more than one victory. It demanded a revolution. As the heavy glass doors of Willow Creek Precinct swung shut behind Lieutenant Hayes and the disgraced officer Daniel Holt, a profound stillness settled over the lobby, broken only by the faint drip of water from Dr. Angela Carter's soaked clothes. The civilians, their faces a mix of awe and relief, began to disperse, their whispers carrying a fragile hope that justice had taken root. The young officer, still shaken, retreated to his paperwork, while the fluorescent lights cast their dim glow over the scene of a battle won but a war far from over. Carter stood alone in the center of the room, her navy t-shirt clinging to her skin, her braids heavy with water, yet her posture unbroken, her eyes alight with a quiet fire. The weight of the moment of Holt's cruelty, her revelation, and the swift action that followed pressed against her, but it was what came next that stirred her soul. She had exposed a wound in her department, and now, in the quiet aftermath, she allowed herself to reflect on why she'd chosen this path and what it meant for the future she was determined to build. Hours later, in the privacy of her office, Carter sat at her desk, her damp clothes replaced by her crisp chief's uniform, the badge gleaming under the soft light of a desk lamp. The precinct was behind her, but the memory of Holt's contempt, the cold splash of water, and the gasps of the onlookers lingered like a pulse. She leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of a framed photo, younger Angela, graduating with her doctorate, her mother beaming beside her. That woman, full of ambition and ideals, had faced skepticism and barriers but never wavered. Now, as chief of police, she carried that same resolve, magnified by years of experience and a burning need to mend a broken system. "I knew what I was walking into," she later confided to a trusted colleague, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "When I took this job, I read the reports, saw the complaints, racial profiling, dismissive service, officers like Holt, who thought they were untouchable. But numbers and files don't tell the whole story. I needed to feel what our citizens feel, to stand in their shoes, to know if we're failing them when they're at their most vulnerable." Her decision to go undercover as Lila Brooks wasn't a stunt, it was a necessity. In Baltimore, she'd learned that the truth of a department's culture lived in its unguarded moments, in the way officers spoke to a single mother seeking help or an immigrant struggling with English. Carson City, with its vibrant diversity and deep divides, demanded no less. "If I sat in boardrooms or read polished briefings, I'd get half-truths," she said, her eyes narrowing with conviction. "I had to see it raw, unfiltered, even if it meant facing disrespect or worse." The memory of Holt's sneer, his words, "people like you," stung, not because they surprised her, but because they confirmed her fears. She'd felt the sting of prejudice before, as a black woman rising through a field dominated by men, but to experience it so blatantly in her own department cut deeper. Yet, as the water had poured over her, she'd held her ground, not out of pride, but out of duty. I wasn't just Lila Brooks in that moment, she reflected, her voice softening. I was every person who's been dismissed, belittled, or humiliated when they asked for help. That's who I was fighting for. Her resolve had been tested, but it was her belief in reform that kept her steady. Carter didn't see her role as punishing bad actors like Holt. She saw it as rebuilding a system that had lost its way. We're not just enforcers, she told her colleague, her words fierce with purpose. We're guardians, protectors, servants of every single person in this city, no matter who they are. If we can't live up to that, we don't deserve the badge. The disciplinary action against Holta, 1-year unpaid suspension, in the grueling Path to Change program was her first step, a signal that no one was above accountability. But it wasn't enough to tear down. She had to build up. She envisioned a department where officers were trained to listen, to de-escalate, to see the humanity in every face they met. Change is messy, she admitted, a faint smile breaking through. It's slow, it's painful, and it makes enemies. But it's possible. I've seen it before, and I'll see it here. Her hope wasn't blind optimism, it was rooted in the faces she'd seen in the lobby, the civilians who'd stayed to give statements, their courage a spark of the trust she aimed to rebuild. Even Holt, broken and pleading, lingered in her thoughts. She felt no joy in his downfall, only a sober recognition of the work ahead. People can change, she mused, her voice tinged with cautious faith. But they have to want it, and they have to face the truth about themselves. That's what I'm giving him, a chance, but not a free pass. As she gazed out her window at the lights of Carson City, Carter felt the weight of her mission settle anew. The Precinct incident was a victory, but it was also a mirror, reflecting the flaws she'd sworn to confront. Her heart swelled with a quiet determination not just to reform her department, but to inspire a city to believe in justice again. The road was long, but she was ready, driven by a vision of a future where no one would face a counter and feel invisible. That hope, fragile but fierce, was her guiding star, and she would follow it no matter the cost. As Dr. Angela Carter's reflection faded into the quiet of her office, the ripples of her actions at Willow Creek Precinct were already spreading far beyond its cracked linoleum floors. The incident, a single act of cruelty met with a swift, unflinching response, had ignited a spark in Carson City, Nevada, a city weary of broken promises and eroded trust. The civilians who'd witnessed Officer Daniel Holt's downfall carried the story with them, their whispers of a chief who stood soaked but unbroken, breathing life into a community desperate for hope. The precinct, once a symbol of neglect, now stood as a battleground where accountability had claimed its first victory. But this was no mere anecdote of one officer's disgrace or one leader's triumph. It was a clarion call, a challenge to confront the shadows within a system and the courage to reshape it. Carter's undercover mission, born from a fierce belief that truth could only be found in the raw, unguarded moments of service, had exposed a wound festering in her department. Holt's actions, his sneers, his insults, the water poured in a fit of rage, were not just personal failings but symptoms of a deeper malaise, unchecked bias, tolerated misconduct, and a culture that too often turned a blind eye. Yet, in that moment of crisis, Carter had shown what leadership could be. She didn't just demand justice, she embodied it, standing firm in her drenched t-shirt, her voice cutting through the chaos with a resolve that silenced excuses. Her decision to suspend Holt and enroll him in the Path to Change program wasn't about punishment alone, it was about possibility, a belief that even the worst among us might grow if forced to face their truths. The aftermath was electric. Within days, the story of the undercover chief spread through Carson City, from coffee shops to community centers, fueling debates and dreams. Good officers, those who'd long yearned for a department they could be proud of, felt a surge of pride, their faith in reform rekindled. They saw in Carter a leader who walked the talk, who didn't hide behind a desk but stepped into the fire to protect the city's soul. But not everyone cheered. Some veteran officers, steeped in old ways, grumbled in break rooms, calling her methods invasive, her standards too harsh. They feared a chief who saw too much, who held a mirror to their flaws. Carter knew this divide, felt its weight, but she pressed on, undeterred. Reform wasn't about pleasing everyone, it was about doing what was right, even when it stung. Her actions sent a message louder than any memo. The era of cover-ups and complacency was over. She rolled out mandatory retraining, emphasizing respect, de-escalation, and accountability, using Holt's case as a stark lesson in what not to be. Community dialogue sprang up, bridging gaps between police and citizens, each meeting a step toward trust. The Path to Change program, with its grueling demands on Holtunger management, anti-bias training, therapy, and service in the very communities he'd scorned, became a symbol of her vision. Justice that corrects, not just condemns. Yet, Holt's journey was uncertain. As he began the program, his face a mask of shame and resentment, questions lingered. Could a man so entrenched in prejudice truly change? Would he embrace the chance or cling to his old ways, risking permanent dismissal? Carter didn't have the answer. But she believed in the attempt. Change is hard, she'd said, but it's not impossible. We have to try, or we're just giving up on people. That belief, rooted in her own struggles as a Black woman, navigating a world quick to judge, drove her to see potential where others saw only failure. This story, at its core, is a testament to the power of leadership that dares to act. Carter's disguise wasn't a trick, it was a tool, a way to peel back the veneer and expose the rot that thrives in silence. It reminds us that bias, whether a shouted slur or a quiet dismissal, erodes the dignity of those it targets and the integrity of those who wield it. It shows that power, unchecked, breeds contempt. But power guided by principle can heal. Carter's courage, her willingness to face humiliation, to demand accountability, to offer a path forward challenges us all to look at our own systems, our own biases, and ask, what are we tolerating and at what cost? The lesson here is clear. Responsibility isn't optional. It's the bedrock of justice, the promise that every person, no matter their background, deserves respect. Leaders like Carter, who step into the fray, who confront uncomfortable truths, are the ones who move us forward. But the story also raises a deeper question, one that lingers like a heartbeat. Can someone like Holt, steeped in prejudice, truly transform? Is a second chance a path to redemption or a futile hope? Carter believed in trying, but the answer lies in Holt's choices and in the systems that hold him accountable. The fight for justice in Carson City is far from over, but with leaders like Carter at the helm, there's hope that change, though hard-won, is within reach. As the dust settled in Carson City, I, Dr. Angela Carter, stood at the crossroads of justice and hope, my heart still carrying the weight of that day at Willow Creek Precinct. When I stepped into that lobby as Lila Brooks, soaked by Officer Holt's contempt, I wasn't just testing a system, I was fighting for every person who's ever felt invisible, dismissed, or unworthy of respect. That moment, raw and painful, wasn't about me alone. It was about the countless faces I serve, the ones who deserve a police force that protects, not punishes, their dignity. Choosing to go undercover wasn't easy. It meant facing the ugliness of bias head-on, feeling its sting, and still standing tall. But I did it because I believe in a truth that reports can't capture. The heart of a community's trust beats in the small, everyday interaction show. An officer responds to a plea for help, how they see the person standing before them. What I found in Holt's actions wasn't just one man's failure, it was a mirror, reflecting a system that had let prejudice fester too long. Yet, in that same mirror, I saw possibility. Suspending Holt and giving him a path to change wasn't about leniency. It was about accountability with purpose, a chance to rebuild what was broken, not just tear it down. This journey taught me that reform isn't a single act, it's a commitment, a daily choice to confront hard truths and demand better from ourselves and those we lead. The lesson here is profound. Justice isn't just punishment, it's the courage to hold power accountable while daring to believe in redemption. It's about leaders who act, who step into the fray, and who remind us that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. But it's also about use all of use asking what we tolerate in our own lives, our own systems, and whether we're brave enough to challenge it. As I look to Carson City's future, I hold on to hope, fragile but fierce, that change is possible when we choose responsibility over indifference. So, I ask you, can someone like Holt truly change? Should we offer second chances, and at what cost? This story isn't the end, it's a beginning, a call to reflect, to act, and to build a world where justice isn't a dream but a reality. If this story moved you, hit that like button to spread its message. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what change looks like. And subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, challenge, and ignite your passion for a better tomorrow. Together, we can keep the fight for justice alive.